Gentrification's detractors will tell you that rising rents and increased property values force out locals and small businesses from affected neighborhoods. Proponents say the influx of new residents and businesses is worth celebrating, as the change leads to a better quality of life for an entire area. Joining us now to help us look at both sides of the gentrification coin, in New York, New York, Sharon Zukin. She is professor of sociology at Brooklyn College and the City University of New York Graduate Center. In Washington, D.C., Christopher Lineberger, the Charles Bendit Distinguished Scholar and Research Professor of Urban Real Estate at the George Washington University School of Business. And with us here in studio, Martine August, who's got her doctorate from the Department of Geography and Program Planning at the University of Toronto, Diane Dyson, Director of Research and Public Policy at Wood Green Community Services, and Kyle Ray, the former Toronto City Councillor, now Urban Development Consultant and Partner at PQR Solutions. And I'm sorry we have no time for the program because your titles are also wonderfully long. It's good to have our friends on the line from the American capital, from New York City, and to our friends here in the studio as well. Chris, I'd like to just start the first few minutes of the program with you and just pick your brains on some of the background here, because since the early 90s, let's start there. I wonder if you could just share with us your thoughts on how the dream of, you know, the suburban home, the picket fence, the shiny car in the two-car driveway, garage, how has that changed over the last 25 years or so in the United States?
Well, we're in the middle of a structural shift in how we build this country and how you're building your country. That for 50 years, it was the drivable suburban approach to life that we all knew and loved, and that's what the market wanted, and we in real estate built that kind of stuff. And of course, we also, in this country in particular, we basically disinvested in our cities. You did it much less. And of course, we also had a phenomenal crime problem in our cities. But starting in the early 90s, crime went down dramatically. We still don't know why, but it went down, thank goodness. And we began to see that the pendulum was starting to swing back in the mid-90s in the US. You got started a little earlier. Again, you did not throw away your cities like we did. So you all brought us back from the edge, and we began to see this walkable urban development, and we now have pent-up demand for it that I think is going to take a good 30 years until we catch up with that pent-up demand. And there's lots of benefits of this, but it is a major market trend that will be around for the rest of most of the people that are on this TV show.
Kyle Ray, that expression I just heard, walkable urbanism. You want to give your best handy-dandy definition of what that means?
Walkable urbanism is the realization that neighborhoods can be successful, that people can walk to work, walk to entertainment, walk to their school, their kids can walk. They become the center of people's lives. And instead of having to use necessarily transit, which isn't bad, but cars are not part of your everyday life. In fact, I've never had a driver's license. I walk to work. I've never had a driver's license.
In your whole life?
In my whole life.
You've never driven a car?
I did. I got a 360. No, a 120. I got a 120 back in 1970. To get a test, and I never did it.
You don't know what you're missing. It's really a lot of fun.
I love not having it.
Okay.
I love not having it.
And I guess the big change now is, Sharon Zukin, let me go to you on this. The big change is that more people are embracing this notion of walkable urbanism. Is that right?
I live in a city where people walk all the time, but we also depend on mass transit. So I disagree a bit with Chris because I see the gentrification trend being driven by lifestyle in the sense of consumption of entertainment and food and being around exciting people and exciting cultures. Also in the sense of a figure in urbanism who was very much loved in both Toronto and New York, Jane Jacobs, in a strange and perverted way. Her ideal of the ballet of the street, where the merchants know your name and everyone who's a neighbor is keeping their eyes on the sidewalk and keeping social order. Her ideal of diverse neighborhoods in the sense of physical diversity and diversity of attractions, that is what is drawing people to cities with good and also bad consequences.
Let's talk gentrification. So you want to give your favorite definition of what you mean when you say that word?
And I was talking to a few people about this just in the past few days and found out it's a tough word even to say, gentrification.
Let alone define.
And then to figure out what it is. And so what I really, when I was talking to people in my neighborhood that have seen a lot of change, the newcomers to the neighborhood tend to be higher income and they have different jobs and occupations than the people that settled there 25 years ago or 40 years ago. I think what I'm talking about then is that sort of the change that happens, and there are both positive and negative elements to it. More often, people will complain about the cost of coffee goes up, or that you can't find a good piece of cheese because gentrification hasn't arrived yet. So you hear it put in very practical terms about what does gentrification look like at the neighborhood level.
People complain, isn't it? You can't get a good piece of cheese in the neighborhood? Really?
We're working with a residents association along the Danforth, and where they're voting what should go into some of these empty storefronts. And so cheese shops and fish stores and all these things are the things that people are looking for. Good brunch spots, really hot.
Well, we're going to show a couple of pictures right now because there have been some. This is a pretty hot topic in a lot of places around North America right now. Our first picture here, anti-gentrification protests erupting over the redevelopment of Vancouver's downtown Eastside. Yeah. That's happened. And then if you go south from there, protesters in San Francisco stopped chartered buses from carting Google employees who've recently moved into the city in droves to nearby Silicon Valley. So, Chris, pick up the story there. Gentrification, how does it fit into this picture of the new American dream?
Well, it's either the most beloved word or the most hated word in the language. And whether you feel good about it or bad about it really doesn't matter. Gentrification is just life. And it's sort of like bitching and moaning about the weather. It just is. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be dealing with gentrification for the next generation. So let's just deal with it. And our opinion of whether it's good or bad really doesn't mean much. The question is that we have
I'd like to interrupt there and say something to Chris, because I think that you have to look at the common elements of Vancouver and San Francisco, as well as Toronto and New York, to understand what's driving gentrification. It's not just convenience to transportation or to work. It's the development of the finance and media economy. When you have a labor market, a local labor market with very polarized income levels, you are bound to have a very polarized housing market. And that's why we see protests in these cities against gentrification.
Chris, you want to come back on that?
It's the knowledge economy. I certainly agree. That's where this is mainly playing out. But I believe that other metro areas are following in the wake of the various coastal cities, such as Denver and Salt Lake City, are coming right along with a lot of gentrification. And it is creating economic benefits, but there's unintended consequences, which you've just heard about. And those unintended consequences need to be dealt with in a conscious fashion. We can no longer use presently we have an affordable housing strategy, particularly in this country, but it also applies up in Canada, but mainly in this country, that our current affordable housing strategy is drive until you qualify. Just keep on driving another 10, 20 miles, and you'll find something that you can afford. Of course, you'll be spending most of your income on transportation, i.e. cars, and you'll never see your kids. And you'll be polluting the planet while you go.
I want to get Martine on this comment that you made earlier, which is it's all well and good to be for or against gentrification. The fact of the matter, it just is. What's your view on that?
It's just happening?
It just is. It's like spinning in the wind. You can be against it all you want, but it's happening.
Well, I think it's a great way to justify the continued gentrification of our urban landscapes by convincing everybody that we have no power to stop it. And I think I do agree with the last point that Chris made, is that we do need stronger affordable housing policies, because there are things that we can do to stop gentrification. This is a process that is based on policies that accept that market logics should determine how we build cities. Market logics should be adopted to allocate housing in cities. And that's why you get this drive till you qualify landscape of urban affordability. And so I think that there's plenty that we can do. And where I disagree with Chris is that it doesn't matter what we think. I think it matters tremendously what we think.
Let me get Kyle Ray on this. When you used to represent part of downtown Toronto on Toronto City Council, not that many years ago, Gentrification, was that something you wanted to see happen to your less well-off neighborhoods, or were you opposed to it happening, or what was your position?
There were parts of the constituency that were quite stable and they weren't looking for a change. There are, and I would call it change. I think gentrification's loaded. There are neighborhoods that do really need change. In the East Downtown neighborhood, where there's a lot of services for people living in shelters, a lot of crack dealing that was occurring. It was very unsafe. There was a lot of assaults in the neighborhood. People who lived there wanted to see change. I don't think they were looking for gentrification. They were looking for safety. They were looking for a neighborhood that they could be proud of. So there are parts of the city that look for that. But I think usually if you're looking for change or trying to measure that change, you'll see it after it's too late. Like, it happens quite incrementally. It's not something that you can identify and say we have to stop that, especially if you don't have, as we do in Canada, we don't have affordable housing policies. The federal government got out of funding affordable housing in 1993, and the provincial government got out of it in 1995. So if we don't have a system in place that's able to build new affordable housing in inner cities, then we're not going to be able to affect what Martine's trying to see.
But hold off on that yet. I still want to get to the understanding of when developers approached you, for example, and said, we want to buy up those 10 houses right there and put up, brand spanking new townhouses or something like that, which will sell for twice the value and will, of course, attract a different kind of clientele and services that come with and so on. Was your default position yes or no?
The answer, frankly, Steve, was that they couldn't do it. There was a Rental Housing Protection Act that the province had until 1996, and then when the province the Harris government got rid of RHPA, we then replaced it with our own bylaw to make sure that if there was rental housing in a building, and there were more than 4 units in the block that was going to be redeveloped, then those units of affordable housing needed to be replaced. Nobody touched them then. Most of the intensification that happened in my constituency and a lot of the constituencies were surface parking lots. Perhaps office buildings or warehouses that had been torn down, because you can do that without requesting the city's permission to do that. And that's where the condos went out.
Got it. Just in case anybody thinks gentrification is something relatively new, it isn't. Apparently this term was first coined in 1964. There was a British sociologist named Ruth Glass describing the transformation that she was seeing, and I just want to read a little something related to that. She observed, one by one, many of the working class neighborhoods of London have been invaded by the middle classes, upper and lower. Shabby, modest mews and cottages, 2 rooms up and 2 down, have been taken over when their leases have expired and have become elegant, expensive residences. Once this process of gentrification starts in a district, it goes on rapidly until all or most of the original working class occupiers are displaced and the whole social character of the district is changed. Okay, that was the view in 1964. Is that still what it means today? Is that the phenomenon as it exists today?
I think there's probably a few more nuances in it, but just the way she described 2 rooms up and 2 rooms down. My neighbors, Daryl and June, moved into the neighborhood back in the 1970s and raised 4 kids in those 2 bedrooms. Brother had to go sleep in the basement, but I mean, these were homes that and across the street there was another family with 5 kids and stuff. So this is a neighborhood that's changed dramatically, because now who lives in these homes are single adults or sometimes couples with no kids. More often now we're starting to see, as the housing prices have risen and they're not so much seen as starter homes, we're starting to see that people moving in are moving in and having a baby and staying. So now we're seeing more children going to the local schools and things like that. But it is that same dynamic. And I struggle with the idea about the displacement, because it happens in 2 different ways. We've actually, in my neighborhood, seen the number of the population drop, because there's just not as many people living in the houses anymore, although there are more homes than there were 10 years ago. But we're also seeing that the people that are coming in are of a different racial and class background. So while the homeowners that may have bought in, like my neighbors Daryl and June, he was a train conductor, while he may be able to sell his house now for $250,000 and feel like a quarter millionaire, it's a matter that they're doing it and moving out much farther outside the city. So I've had many neighbors do that, just to say that the neighborhood's changed around them. Their children are not buying into the neighborhood or not living near them anymore, so they are moving.
Let me find out from Sharon in New York whether, in your experience, gentrification equals displacing low-income people?
Well, I want to agree with the last comment and add a few more nuances. First, there's a real difference in the effects of gentrification on renters and on homeowners, because homeowners can stay in place. Renters have to face rapidly rising housing prices, and they're the ones who are in the most vulnerable situation. But then, yes, it's true that a family can sell their house in a gentrifying neighborhood for a lot more money than they paid. So they're under a lot of temptation to sell and retire, but their children may want to maintain the house, and then they're under the temptation of making that money and using it to buy other housing that might be as good in a far different place. So there are different pressures depending on whether you rent or whether you own your home. And then there are pressures on stores. How many people have seen the local hardware store close and be replaced by a frozen yogurt shop? And a lot of these things, a lot of these changes in the small stores represent the growing power and expansion of chain stores. A lot of them represent the obsolescence of certain kinds of products, like shoe repair in an age when everybody's wearing athletic shoes. Or the obsolescence of many audio products like vinyl records and CDs and DVDs. So we're seeing a lot of things changing neighborhood character all at once, and there are neighborhoods where the gentrifiers who are wealthier and are buying homes are people of color, people of mixed race backgrounds, and others where the diversity of more affluent people coming in brings white people.
Kyle, again, in your experience, when you dealt with gentrification issues as a city councilor, what happened to the lower income people who moved out?
Well, there are some projects that the city got involved in on their own projects, like Regent Park, where we had our own people who were tenants of the city. We had to accommodate them elsewhere, and then they came back into the neighborhood. But for people who are private tenants, they would move into other neighborhoods. But again, I said it was very difficult for a developer to actually take down an apartment building that would get no support from the city. It wouldn't happen.
I guess I'm really trying to get a handle on whether or not gentrification automatically equals the displacement of low-income people. And if it is, do we have any solutions for what to do about that? Chris, you want to come in on that?
Well, first we have to understand what gentrification really is, and from a purely economic point of view, it is the increase in the price of land. It is a shortage of neighborhoods and regionally significant places like downtowns that have the walkable urban characteristics that the market's looking for. So the thing about Canada and the US is that we stole this land fair and square, and we got a lot of it. We don't have a shortage of land, we have a shortage of walkable urban land. So I never thought I'd say this, but we have a supply side problem. We only add 2% to the built environment in a good year. And we've had a lot of bad years down here in the US these last few years. And so we've got a lot of catching up to do. And by the way, this is not just a center city issue. That where we're building walkable urban places is as much or more about the urbanization of the suburbs as it is with the redevelopment of our center cities. So North York, Scarborough, up in Toronto, these are urbanizing suburbs.
Well, go
that
further. Mississauga,
are creating
Brampton,
walkable urban
too.
places.
Yeah.
Exactly. Don Mills. I mean, these are places that are urbanizing suburbs that are capturing a share of the market for a different kind of walkable urban than the downtown adjacent neighborhoods that I think we've been talking about today.
Martine, what about that issue of what happens to the displaced lower income people as a result of gentrification?
Well, they get pushed further and further away. And so that's the social justice issue related to gentrification that I think we have to keep at the forefront of our minds. In answer to your early question, I think that gentrification does equal displacement, and there's really no way around that, and that's why we have to focus on this as a problem.
Is it 100% a problem? I mean, on the one hand, you're going to have a revitalized city.
Yeah, the key question, Stephen, is revitalized for who? And so I think that often people who are promoting gentrification and saying, I love coffee shops, I love a revitalized urban landscape, those are the people that get to enjoy that. Those are the people that are having that type of consumption landscape that's built to their precise preferences. But what I'm asking is, what about the impacts on lower income populations who are serially being displaced from these communities? And typically we see more immigrants in those populations, more people of color, people who are vulnerable, marginalized groups. And these are the people that are constantly being forced further and further away. And this is a pattern that we've seen not only for decades, but even centuries.
Diane, does it feel to you as if there are any useful solutions for that group of people?
I think we do have to look at other things aside from the market options, because I'm thinking of different neighbors that I've known that have lived on the top floor of a house and then have had to move and been evicted because it was being converted, ostensibly because the landlord wanted to move their family in, but not always, and we would keep a sharp eye to look for those sorts of things. So I know one woman who's been through 5 different homes in the past few years just because she continually gets to move into places that are being flipped, and so it's a really disruptive life, and yet her life is centered around the school, her family's nearby. She doesn't want to be pushed out to the edges and further out. There are more probably affordable places out where transit doesn't reach. But we're in an area that is walkable, that she can do her grocery shopping and things like that.
Don't misunderstand, I don't mean this to sound like a heartless question, but we do live in a capitalist society, we do live in a market economy. How much responsibility, Kyle, is it upon everybody else to find a solution for those who get displaced because of gentrification?
I'm going to say 100% responsibility. And I think that's where we see federal and provincial governments turn their back on people. They used to have very robust programs of funding the building of capital, in terms of capital, and subsidizing the units for people who lived in affordable housing, and they walked away. And the City of Toronto can't do that on the tax base, on the property tax base. It's impossible, especially when the province in 98 gave us all the affordable housing without a penny to maintain them. So they walked away and they gave us the keys, and I think we have a problem with our 2 senior levels of government have failed miserably to live up to the expectation.
Well, okay, in case that question didn't sound heartless enough, Sharon, let me come back at it again with you and say, you live in a part of the world that has some of the most expensive land anywhere in the world. And some people might ask why anybody who's not rich ought to feel entitled to live in the most expensive, richest land in the country. What's the answer to that?
We understand that a basic component of cities is diversity. And what we mean by diversity is economic, social, cultural, ethnic diversity. People don't move to a city primarily to live among others like themselves. They may try to move to a building to be surrounded by immediate neighbors like themselves. But cities have to be places where a whole range of people and groups brush against each other. This is the essence of New York, and this is the essence of an authentic city, which is culturally what people seek in city life today. But you're right, what we have in New York is apartments that are selling to people with a lot of money for $50 or $20 million. And you have a trickle-down effect where the prices of all apartments lower in range than those prices are being driven up, so that you can't find a modestly priced apartment in the same part of town or even in the same city.
Okay, I'm going to be devil's advocate again then. Let me do this one more time. Tell me why that's a bad thing if somebody wants to buy an apartment or a condo for $50 million. Think of the land transfer taxes that'll go into the city's coffers. Think of the property taxes that person's going to be paying going forward. Think of all of that extra money coming in that you could do social good with. Is that not a fair point?
There aren't going to be any people to do social good with if they can't live in the city. But the point I want to make is that New York has been trying to put into place inclusionary zoning. The city doesn't have money to build more public housing. As you probably know, since the 1970s, the U.S. government has not been building new public housing. And in fact, in most cities outside of New York in the United States, city governments have been tearing down their public housing and dispersing the residents in other places, often in very poor and majority minority inner suburbs. So inclusionary zoning depends on the developer's goodwill and the negotiations that the city government can make to provide developers with some sort of financial incentives for the developers to provide 20-25% of the apartments that they are building at an affordable rent. The problem with the affordable rent, well, there are a couple of problems with affordable rent. One is that the formula is set by the federal government according to median household income in a metropolitan area. And in many metropolitan areas, if not most metropolitan areas in the United States, the median household income is higher in the suburbs than in the inner city, so that many people who live in the inner city cannot afford the affordable rent. The second problem is that the number of apartments that will come online at affordable rents is very small in comparison with the need for them. And the third problem is that often developers try to sneak around the requirement by providing the affordable apartments around the corner from the main apartment house or in a part of the apartment complex that has fewer amenities than the market rent apartments.
Okay, but you said something in the midst of all of that got me thinking about an example we have here in Toronto. And I've actually written a lengthy, I think 6-part series on our TVO website about this. It's called Regent Park. It's in downtown Toronto. It was, I think it's fair to say, one of the most godforsaken parts of the city for decades. And essentially, well, Kyle, do you want to pick up the story? They've torn down all the bad stuff. They put up a lot of new stuff. And
I think Martine, who's done her thesis on it,
you want to pick up on that? I mean, well, let me ask you. To the extent I understand what's going on there, they tore down all the bad places where people lived. They renovated those places. They built new places. They put new places, yes, exactly. The people who used to live there went and lived in other places and then got first right of refusal if they wanted to come back or stay where they were. So no low-income people displaced by gentrification. Good or bad?
Well, I think that's a simplified and inaccurate description of the Regent Park revitalization.
Simplified and inaccurate?
Yeah, sorry. But you know what?
See if you get invited back. Okay, no, go ahead. All right, go ahead. You tell me. Go ahead.
Well, I think there's been lots of displacement from Regent Park. For example, it's still presently underway. We're right now entering the third phase of a 5-phase process.
Right.
It's going on for maybe about 15, 20 years. And a lot of people who moved away from Regent Park haven't yet moved back. A lot of people were not allowed to come back on site because not all of the housing was rebuilt on site. And even if people are temporarily displaced, that's still displacement. And that's still the disruption of a community.
Well, what's the alternative?
The alternative, you could, in fact, in other subsequent public housing redevelopments here in Toronto, there's a zero displacement rule where people are displaced elsewhere in the community during the redevelopment and then never actually dislocated from their community, disconnected from their schools, social supports, places they volunteer, friendships, local bonds of community, and so on. And so if you can prevent that type of displacement and disruption in a low-income community that's being regenerated or reinvested in, I think that can get at some of the issues facing those communities.
You've looked at this, right? You've been down there studying it?
Yeah, I have been down there studying it. Yeah.
You don't like what's going on down there?
Well, I'm critical of many aspects of it. I mean, what I do like is that there's finally some investment in those homes, which was desperately needed. Although I do disagree with your characterization of Regent Park as a kind of godforsaken place. I mean, what I found
well, not now, but it sure was.
In fact, I think that's
It was.
that's a
It was a dangerous neighborhood.
This is a common perception that you often see put on public housing communities, and often places where you find a lot of racialized poverty, stereotypes and stigmatization of these places as dangerous. And a lot of that it feeds into and justifies the need for redevelopment and the need for gentrification. So another key piece about Regent Park is that it is being massively gentrified. They're building 5,400 condominiums in this community. It's going to be 75% market housing. So there's a dramatic social and cultural transformation being unleashed on that community.
And physical. There are now roads in that neighborhood. They didn't have roads before. You couldn't get into, Regent Park could not be part of the City of Toronto, and the City of Toronto could not be part of Regent Park. You couldn't enter into that neighborhood. There was no way in except
put the
walking.
roads back in.
The roads are gone back
It
in.
runs right through the center of Regent
No,
Park.
but-
People walked
you mean
around
Gerrard?
in Regent Park. No, I mean Dundas.
No, well, that's one end, one the other. That's not enough. In between the buildings, there was no pathway.
We should just explain that Regent Park was this huge swath of land in the middle of downtown Toronto that all of the homes were kind of built in facing each other, which created
A park. It was houses in a park.
right?
Without
but lots
access.
of it cut off from the city.
Regent Park was built at a human scale. It was 4 or 5 stories high, so loud enough essentially so that a mother could call down to her child playing outside and say, "Come on in for dinner." Now, who occupied those spaces after numbers of decades may have changed and shifted, but it was a community with strong social ties and people knew each other. And what happened as it was redeveloped is that instead of moving people around within the community, we moved them to Scarborough and other suburbs where they were landed in places where they had no social connections.
Chris, are there examples in the United States like the one we're talking about here where perhaps you can umpire this dispute we're having up here in Toronto?
I doubt if I could umpire it, but we certainly, at the place level, at the downtown level, at the neighborhood level, this is probably the best way to deal with the affordable housing challenges that we have. I think the best example in the U.S. right now is the Pearl District out in Portland, where it was a low income but primarily obsolete light industrial section, right adjacent to downtown Portland, and they put a streetcar in. And $3.5 billion of private sector investment showed up. But the city said, we want the Pearl District to look just like the rest of the city. And without extraordinary subsidies, the Pearl District, what's built there is 45% affordable and workforce housing. And it's a great testament to the ability to have mixed income housing, which we have always had in our cities up until 60 years ago, as we started to suburbanize and we wanted to really, do what my wife calls be with JLUs, just like us.
Huh. Chris, who paid for it?
But a variety of different programs. There were some nonprofits. There were the few federal programs that we have here. There were all of the city level programs, such as that there would be 20% affordable housing set-asides. So it was a layer cake of different financing, but it wasn't special financing. It wasn't that they directed a special effort. It was just having the intention and focusing it on this place, and primarily it was private sector driven. 45% affordable and workforce housing. It's the best model I've seen.
Are you concerned that, and I'm going to use those initials Chris used a while ago, that
The JLU.
that gentrification creates neighborhoods of JLUs, just like us's?
I just love that because I've spent a part of my career working at United Way, and we talk about the importance of mixed neighborhoods. And then I was standing one day out on the sidewalk with a neighbor who said that he was just so happy with the neighborhood now because it was people just like us. He almost said that. And I realized that he's right in that we were at that sort of mid-stage of life where we worried about whether we knew where to borrow a hammer or a drill or a bunt pan, things like that. But that if we had a lot of young people, such as down by the universities or up at Yonge Eglinton, we'd have noise complaints and all sorts of things. And so it set me back to think about what do we mean by mixed income, mixed neighborhoods, because often the people that get along best are the people at their best life stages. So when I try and talk about this with other people, I say that we talk about the importance of affordable housing or making sure we don't chase people out, let's think about where is the kindergarten assistant going to live? Don't we want her to live in our neighborhood? Where is the person who serves us our coffee live? That these when we're building a mixed neighborhood, we're building places that they can afford to live. And where we've gotten to so far is that most of our homes in a neighborhood generally are around the same price point. So most of us have around the same kinds of income, and then we end up not being that diverse part of Toronto that we all celebrate.
That's the assessment.
But that
That's how
wasn't the way it
assessment
used to
works.
be.
One house inflates, and then the next one, and so all of them. The assessment for all those properties go up, and so people sell them.
Chris, you wanted to
great
say?
income.
But that wasn't the way it used to be. Before suburbia, we had mixed income communities all over the place. I have this great vision of a place that I walked past in Georgetown here in DC. And it was built in the 1820s. And on one side of the street is a mansion. It would sell for $10 million today. On the other side of the street are 15-foot wide, 2-story clapboard row houses, also built in the 1820s. Undoubtedly, the worker housing that were the clapboard row houses could have been the workers that built the mansion, and they lived across the street from one another. This happens throughout the world. A block away, you will have lower income housing, but we have so segregated ourselves, and a lot of it is the secession of the elites, that they've gone out to the suburbs, they've wanted to go into their master plan communities, into their private schools. Now we're having those wealthier people come back. They need to get used to living in a mixed income place. But it's nothing new. We've been doing it for the 6,000 years that we've been building cities.
Martine, the notion of this mixed neighborhood. Maybe we should just go back to first principles here. Explain why it's important for society to have rich people living with middle-class people living with poor people and not all just JLUs.
I think people inherently like the idea of socially mixed neighborhoods, people living together in social harmony, and I think I like that idea too.
Not in gated communities, they don't like that idea.
No.
Not that we have any in Toronto. I don't know that we do in Toronto, but
Richwood Park.
okay, maybe a little bit. But really, it's a good thing to do?
Well, I think that it's complicated because we all like the idea of socially mixed neighborhoods, and we like the idea of being able to have the construction worker living across from the mansion that they built that Christopher was describing to us. But I think the problem with gentrification is that it doesn't create socially mixed neighborhoods. In fact, it tends to create socially homogeneous neighborhoods and concentrations of wealth. And so this idea of hitting this point where you have mix and everybody lives together in harmony, if you're going to allow the market to allocate where people are living, and as the prices keep going up, as Kyle was describing, eventually you're going to find that displacement happening, and low-income people are going to be pushed further and further away. Unless there's some sort of protections to ensure that
there's rental housing protection, if there's rent control, and if you're building affordable housing.
Yeah, and lots of it in
Yeah.
all neighborhoods, and
Yeah.
not just. So the other piece with social mix is that it's often used to justify bringing wealthy people into poor areas. So this is the case with public housing redevelopment here, with all sorts of policies. The argument is that these poor people need social mix so that they can be more healthy. That's how we create healthy neighborhoods.
I think, listen, this is your
Well,
area,
in
not
fact,
mine.
that's a policy that's
No, Sharon, and then I'll hand you the microphone. I think the idea is the economics of it. Isn't it the case that you need the rich people to come in there and buy condos so that you can help subsidize the units and the construction costs for the lower income people? Isn't that part of it?
No.
Not
What do you
really.
mean, no.
No, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work, or that's not the idea?
It doesn't. We don't. No one, I would say, in government goes out to build or approve that kind of housing because you want wealthy people that are going to subsidize the rest of us. It's not. That's not how it works.
How does it work?
Well, I disagree.
Okay, hang on. Chris and then Sharon, please. Chris, come on in. What do you mean? Chris and then Sharon.
Well,
As a politician,
I can just say that here in downtown DC, 20 years ago, downtown DC was a place that you wouldn't be caught dead in. Then again, you might have been. And there were
But
90
Christopher,
service
lots of
parking
people lived
lots.
there. Lots of people lived in the downtown DC. I mean, who are we talking about when we say we wouldn't be caught dead
I'm
there?
talking about the commercial core of downtown DC. And there were very few housing units in downtown DC. Most of the office buildings were empty, and almost all the retail was empty. And now it's almost built out because we have a height limit, and so it's 95% built out. Downtown DC now generates $1 billion of net income to the District of Columbia, which pays 100% of a now improving school district in DC. So that's a conscious strategy that was put in place. Now that's nice, but it needs to go further. And the Downtown Business Improvement District needs to take responsibility for an affordable housing program, to bring affordable housing to where there's opportunities, so those shopkeepers and those folks that are pouring the coffee for you in the morning can walk to work as well.
Sharon.
Well, I'd like to return to the idea of social mix.
Yes.
This is not exactly a U.S. idea, although I do find it in European cities and perhaps also north of the border in Canada. But the idea of social mix is quite different from diversification in the U.S. When we talk about increasing diversity, we mean bringing lower income people, middle income people, people of color, together with more affluent people and white people. But in European cities, the policy of social mix does indeed imply parachuting native-born, so-called white Europeans in the place of concentrations of immigrants. Now, a European government might say that they want to avoid US-style ghettos with some of the social problems that ghettos have been known to engender. But in fact, what happens is that the migrant populations are displaced the way we've been talking about low-income people and people of color being displaced toward the inner suburbs. So social mix is a peculiar policy that has to be looked at very carefully. Do we want people of all different types living together? I think a lot of us would say yes. Do we want them living in the same building? Maybe. Do we want people of different income levels having the opportunity to live close into the city? Yes, we do. Do we want firefighters and school teachers and service employees to live in the city and in the inner city alongside gentrifiers? Yes. How can we do that? In New York City, the new mayor suggests, and the former mayor also suggested, that we build denser, taller housing. Maybe so, but then we lose some of the physical character of the city. Rent control, we have rent control in New York City, but declining every year, partly because it depends on the will of the New York State legislature, which is not an urban assembly, and also because the idea of rent control, for some reason, has lost loyalties of people in New York City. So yes, how can we prevent people who want to stay in their neighborhoods from being displaced? That's the problem that we face.
As long as we're on the topic of New York City, Sharon, I hope you won't mind if we play a clip from a guy who I think a lot of New Yorkers like. They like his movies anyway. Here's Spike Lee, a 57-second rant about what's happened to Brooklyn. Roll tape, please.
I grew up here in New York. It's changed. And why does it take the influx of white New Yorkers in the South Bronx, in Harlem, in Bed-Stuy, in Crown Heights for the facilities to get better? The garbage wasn't picked up every month. When I lived at 165 Washington Park, PS20 was not good. PS11, Rothschild, 294. So why the police went around? When you see white mothers pushing their babies in strollers 3 o'clock in the morning to 125th Street, that must tell you something. And then comes the Christopher Columbus syndrome. You can't discover this. We've been here. You just can't come and book.
Okay. Sharon, that Christopher Columbus syndrome, does that sound familiar to you?
Well, first, I have to say that what I really like about Spike Lee's monologue is that it sounds as though it was ripped from the pages of my last book, Naked City. But I think that Spike Lee has his own experience to draw from. My late colleague Neil Smith, many years ago, debunked the pioneer myth of gentrification. And there are, in fact, two really powerful myths of gentrification. One is that the newcomers to a neighborhood, the gentrifiers, feel as though they have discovered a place that was wilderness before they got there. And the second myth is the myth of the first wave of gentrifiers who believe that the neighborhood was good until they got there. So they're, kind of two sides of the same coin. The newcomers disparage the culture of the longtime residents. They see them, and sometimes they even like the sociability, the good mornings and the how are yous that they hear the longtime residents exchange, but gentrifiers impose their culture over time. And this is the cultural imperialism, if you will, of the market changes that are going through cities today. Gentrifiers don't like people hanging out on street corners. They generally socialize inside their houses or inside restaurants. They don't like men playing dominoes at tables on the street. They don't like the casitas or little houses that were built by Hispanics who created community gardens in the 1970s and 1980s. And gentrifiers surely do not like people barbecuing on their front lawns. So they like to barbecue in their backyards.
Right.
So there are all these cultural changes that gentrifiers bring, which are really derogatory toward and disrespectful toward longtime residents.
Okay, with just a few minutes left here, Diane, would you come in on this issue of the Christopher Columbus syndrome, the people who you didn't discover it, we were here before you?
Well, I live in a neighborhood that I can tell how long you've lived in the neighborhood by what name you call it. So I call it Little India because it's an area that's what people in the 1980s used to call the Gerrard Street Strip. It's now the Gerrard India Bazaar. And prior to that, it was actually sort of an unnamed poor little white strip, but it's variously been Upper Beach, Leslieville, and numerous names. In fact, the Toronto Star once published a sort of the neighborhoods of Toronto, and our strip was the one little area that was blank because nobody could agree what we called it.
And what's the agreement today?
I think we're going with the formal Gerrard India Bazaar, but it doesn't fall off the tongue as easily as Little India.
Politician did that.
Which politician did that?
I'm not going to say.
It's in the middle of
But you know,
the political lines.
What do you think of this Chris Columbus syndrome?
Well, part of the problem is that you have change. Neighborhoods change, families go, families arrive, they bring their own culture, and they celebrate it on their front porch or their back. And they rub up against the people who have been there for a long time, and you make it work. It's the process of change in cities. I just don't think using the term gentrification gives you that much knowledge about what you're talking about. I think it's a change of life, as Chris talked about it.
What do you prefer? If you don't like the word gentrify, what do you prefer?
Well, I've got involved in some projects of the city, like urban renewal, where we, like Young Dundas, but that was commercial. That was a commercial investment.
Yeah.
The neighborhood that you have been working with, the DECA, it is really commercial.
Where's that?
Right? It's Danforth East.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
And that's an interesting too, because it's another dynamic in the gentrification story that there's some work also out of the University of Toronto that looks at commercial gentrification. That what happens when the commercial strip changes for the local surrounding area.
But aren't they acting as though they're Christopher Columbus? The residents are saying we want this kind of store, and we're checking to see who should go in there.
Well, I don't.
I think
you know,
there's a role.
I don't think the jury's in on that because it's such a young project
it is true.
being funded. But they are doing an extraordinary amount of community engagement and trying to reach people in a lot of different ways to make sure that everybody has a say in, should we have a cheese shop or should we have a kids store?
Chris, I guess at the end of the day, the question is, who owns the city? What's the answer to that?
That is the question, and I don't think any one group or any one person certainly does not own the city. I think cities are great because they are vibrant and they change over time. Little India was something else before it was Little India. So, and it's going to be something different 20, 30 years from now. And if we lock it in place, I don't think you're going to be very happy with the consequences. And that vitality will just move someplace else as you freeze it in time. So welcome, embrace the change. And I would also suggest use gentrification. Tap into it to help pay for all the affordable housing subsidies that we need to make this happen.
Kyle?
He's just talked about is very true about the arts community in Toronto. How it's centered in Yorkville. It moved south. It went into Queen West, then Queen West. Now there's this great swath going up Ossington. It moves through the city. As lands are inexpensive, the artists move in, they fix it up, and then the chains come in, forcing the artists out, and they find another cheap neighborhood to convert. It keeps happening.
But
And
what
you're
happens
okay with
when
that process,
there are no
eh?
cheap neighborhoods?
Oh, there will be. It'll come back again. There'll have to be renewal. But I think that's healthy, and that's healthy for the city.
Sharon just asked an important question.
Yeah, I know. I heard it.
When there's no
Yeah.
cheap
What
neighborhoods
happens
left.
when there are none?
It'll come
Yeah.
back again. It'll, 150 years from now.
The way the condos are being built, perhaps.
And again, keep in mind, folks, keep in mind that this isn't just a center city issue. My research shows that 50% of this demand for walkable urbanism is going to urbanizing suburbs.
Yep.
And also, my research is saying 80-90% of all new development over the next generation will be in less than 10% of our existing urbanized land. We have plenty of land. We just don't have enough walkable urban land in our metropolitan regions. So there's plenty of land that we can urbanize so we can drive down those land prices that have gotten ridiculously high because we don't have enough of this kind of product.
Martine, who owns the city?
I think that we should all own the city. I mean, there's this concept of the right to the city that a lot of people increasingly in the United States are fighting for, this sense that we all own the city. We should be able to make a place where people feel comfortable, that's truly socially inclusive for low-income people, for people of color, for marginalized people, for women, and so on. I'm kind of disappointed at this idea that we should embrace gentrification or just expect that it's going to continue to push people further and further out. I mean, that is a massive upheaval and dislocation that you're asking people to endure, and you're always asking the same people to endure it. So the same people that are constantly being shifted aside according to the uneven geography of real estate values, I mean, it's unfair and it's socially unjust. And I think that that's why we have to fight against gentrification.
Kyle, you want the last 20 seconds on that?
Well, it's interesting. In the 50s, it was the wealthy who moved out. So it's not always the same people being asked to move out from the city. There are transitions that have happened for different reasons because of the car. Being able to
It's important to consider that.
There are choices, but people make those decisions.
People with money make those decisions, and if they're forced, if they choose to move out,
it was interesting. Our guest from New York was talking about firefighters and construction. They make a lot of money. They're the ones who are going to be part of the gentrification. Although she named them as being like lower class or lower middle class, in fact, they're part of gentrification.
That's our time, folks. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us on this topic tonight. Sharon Zukin out of New York City. We're glad to have you on the line from the Big Apple. Christopher Lineberger from GWU on the line from Washington, D.C. Our thanks to both of you for participating tonight. Martine August, the PhD graduate in U of T. Kyle Ray, former Toronto City Councillor, now with PQR Solutions. And Diane Dyson for the Wood Green Community Services. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.